probably a little bit more about repositories and some of the offerings that NIH has and where we see this going. I'm gonna, if there's time and interest, I can pull up some additional slides on what we're doing for COVID-19. In particular, what my office is doing for COVID-19. NIH is doing quite a bit. But I work mostly in the sphere of data science as the Associate Director of Data Science. And I also lead the Office of Data Science Strategy with a few of my NIH colleagues who are on the call today. And our work is really to support trans NIH data science activities that no one IC would take on, because it truly lifts many boats. It truly is something that impacts all of NIH or a significant number of ICs. And I'm going to tell you about some of those activities and how we are hoping to support a data ecosystem that truly moves beyond individual data sets into something that's much more collaborative, collective, and integrated. So it's a pleasure to be here. My talk is only 30 minutes because what I'd really like to do is not talk at you, but talk with you. And so I'm going to leave lots and lots of time for us to have a discussion about data science or anything that you feel you'd like to talk about today. Okay, so the next slide. As I've mentioned, my office is small. We target a vision to create a modern and integrated, fair biomedical data ecosystem. You can see that we've created this sort of wheel of FAIR, and the 5 elements that you see are 5 elements of our strategic plan for data science. And I'm going to talk about each of them, and they're each different. But what I hope that you'll get from the discussion is that we are working together and we're working across NIH. So Dr. Jenny Larkin is on our call today. She leads one of our activities as a team lead. We have probably over 80 people at NIH working on different teams that support these activities, from developing community engagement tools to developing significant data infrastructures and everything in between. Okay, so the next slide is just a bit of an introduction, and this is not something that probably anybody needs me to lecture them on, because you are the the originators of the concept of FAIR, but it's just to level set so that I can make my next pitch. But we are all committed here at NIH to supporting FAIR, to making data findable in the ways that it makes sense: searchable resources, unique identifiers, appropriate data and metadata, making this accessible through secure authentication and authorization systems, to retrievable open data architectures that really can search across many repositories. Making data interoperable, truly that must be the grand challenge of FAIR data science. And if we get a chance to talk about COVID, I'll tell you how we're really leveraging a lot of work to make interoperable data and data resources. And finally, the cardinal hope is that others will use what we create, because if we create it only for ourselves, it has limited value. But if we really can reuse our data, our software, our platforms, it lives beyond us. So the next slide, let's say, for example, that we've made data fair. Oh my God, we've won the data race. We have completed our mission and data is now fair. Or is it? The next slide is really what I think of as what happens when we can actually achieve at least some progress in making data fair. It's really just the beginning of data science. It's not the end goal at all. It's the start of something that will be truly revolutionary and changing the way that we do science together. So the next slide. This is just, in case you're not completely and utterly familiar with NIH and all of the components that we support, it's a huge organization, 27 institutes and centers. Some of them are mission-driven in heart, lung, and blood, and aging, and cancer, and some of them are much more generic in general medical sciences, or they're focused on particular data types like genomics data. But one thing we do all have in common is a passion for biomedical research and the health and well-being of our society and our scientific workforce. Data sets come in from everything from structural biology. Jeff, this will resonate with you, and Peter. I'm showing you a cryo-EM structure of a protein complex And you can see that cryo-EM has truly become a master of atomic resolution. It's truly phenomenal what's been accomplished in the past 10 years in this particular structural biology technique, opening up new doors for large-scale protein dynamics, brain imaging, neural circuitry, creating those networks and pathways. And Spark is just one of those wonderful activities that does help with linking imaging to circuitry. And then speaking of imaging, we have lots of different types of cell imaging and tissue imaging, and all the different types of data. Here the data is very complex. Oftentimes it's not static, it's very dynamic. And then finally, the data about us as an environment in the clinic, our behavioral data on our nutrition. So when we think about trying to support fair data science amongst many different communities, it's not an easy proposition by any means. In fact, sometimes, the next slide will show you sometimes how I feel about this. It sort of feels a little overwhelming. So much data, and so hard to get one's arms around it with all the different ways in which people expect to share this data, the different metadata around it and the repositories that hold it. It can be a bit of a challenge. However, in the next slide, I see what you'll see is something that may be a way that we're thinking of going. And I think this is actually a realistic opportunity. And this is, Anna, this is taken directly from our work together in Figshare. And this actually came from our Figshare pilot. I have to tell the story. When I was an undergrad and grad student, I would go into the stacks of my library at the University of Michigan as an undergrad and read the latest journal articles. That was how information I was able to get, was through actual physical paper. It would have been a hard task to get the data. I would have had to write to the PI to get the code. Again, writing to the PI, Peter, this might resonate with you. Trying to get the code to work on any different type of machine was not easy. It was difficult back then, but now, you've clicked to the next slide. This is from our Figshare pilot. The data from this particular article was linked in Figshare to the article itself, and also linked to the grant that this from this PI. What would be nice, and I think this is not a stretch, is to link that data and the code that analyzed that data to common tools and platforms that could be hosted on GitHub, Bioconductor, Galaxy, Jupyter Notebooks, all of those workflows and pipelines linked to the data shared in a repository with the appropriate way to index it and find it, and then also linked to the journal article. It doesn't have to all be in one place, but it does have to be searchable and findable across our different ways of gathering information. So if we were, let's just say at the very minimum base set here, if we were able to make metadata computable, and I think that's not a stretch at all, I think that's absolutely possible, and we could search and link our data based on metadata across systems, I think we would make a lot of progress in finding data from either generalist repositories such as Figshare, Dryad, Zenodo, to our repositories that are supported by communities, like, for example, the Protein Data Bank or GEO or Import, linking them to GitHub, and through their journal articles, making it possible for researchers to read about the data while they're looking at it. That would be a bit of a revolution, and it certainly would be a modern way to think about data science. We're not that far away. Next slide. It's just my way of telling you that that's part of the plan, of the strategic plan for data science. And here's how we'll get there. So this is a vision of the strategic plan and its 5 different areas from data infrastructure. And I'm going to talk about all of these pretty fast, to modernizing a data ecosystem, all the way to the new announcement, which is the data management and sharing policy. So I'm pretty sure that you have heard our big announcement yesterday. Happy Halloween, it's a treat, to tell you that we have released our policy that will go into effect on January 25th. of 2023. So don't panic. It's not a month or two away. It's 2 years plus. So there's plenty of time to really think about it as a community working together, how researchers, any NIH-funded investigator, including our intramural researchers, when they're conducting research and at the start of that project plan, to really think about data and data management by creating a data management plan that articulates how you intend to manage your data in your research project and how you intend to share that data. Not all data has to be shared. We understand that there are different constraints, but when you are going to share that data, how are you going to share that data? Where will you share that data? Can you tell us something about the structure of that data that you'll be shared? Give us some details. And if you're not going to share the data, please tell us why that isn't the case. Our goal is to develop the culture of data sharing, where researchers think in the beginning of the project how they will manage their data and where it will go and how we will work on it together. So this is an exciting new opportunity. Those data management sharing plans are substantial. I think they're 2 pages. Although I do not believe that they are part of the score of your review, I do believe that the reviewers will be able to look at your data management sharing plans, and I do believe that you will be able to associate a cost with data management and data sharing, which is very important. So I'm super pleased. It's been a long time in the work, and we have worked pretty hard to make sure that we have heard all of your input and addressed it in this policy. So my warmest congratulations to our Office of Science Policy and everyone at NIH who worked on this. So this is next slide. This is a change. I'm super excited, but this does require us to think about how we are going to actually support data management and data sharing at scale. NIH supports, I think it's something like, oh man, I think it's like 20,000 plus investigators. So this is going to be a scale of data sharing that is pretty large. So we're thinking about ways in which we can support data management and sharing, from small data sets to PubMed Central, to supporting commercial nonprofit repositories, community repositories, and even supporting data sharing on clouds, which is, as of right now, not entirely complete. I will show you what we can do, and you will see what we cannot do. But as a first stance, next, click. We oh no, you gotta go back. We NIH strongly encourage the community, when possible, to utilize those open access data sharing repositories that support data from those communities. So if you're a structural biologist and you're developing protein structures, your natural choice may be the PDB. If it's an NMR structure, it may be the NMR component. And I think there's at least 1 or 2 data repositories for NMR structures that do link up to the PDB. Likewise, geo or import. If those are your community repositories, we do encourage you to use those. You can see a list of open access data sharing repositories on our BMIC website from the National Library of Medicine. So next slide will show you other ways in which you can find data repositories through BMIC, through DKNet, and SciCrunch, Fair Sharing, DataMed, as well as others. So there are a lot of resources that are available for researchers to find different types of data repositories, and also to find those generalist repositories. We hope that you will take advantage of any and all of these that are appropriate for your data sharing needs. The next slide will tell you a little bit about how NIH supports data repositories and knowledge bases, and this is something that is a direct result of our scientific plan for data science. We recognize that databases and knowledge bases are important research tools in and of themselves and must be supported as such. The next slide click will tell you that historically NIH has funded most of our data repositories and knowledge bases through R01 grants. We felt that was not the appropriate mechanism to support a research tool, and that it needed a special emphasis with the right type of structure for those grants. Next slide. to give those researchers confidence in the data and information integrity, and to know that those data resources were reviewed by their peers for research tools that they are. So the next slide is an announcement of our funding opportunities for data repositories and knowledge bases. Those applications have 4 components: scientific impact for the repository or knowledge base within its field and across the community, community engagement with the users and the journals who will be partnered, we hope, partnered with these repositories and knowledge bases, with an emphasis on data services, data quality, and efficiency of operation. While we didn't require, we do hope that repositories and knowledge bases will take advantage of the cloud infrastructure, and you'll see later in my talk why. And finally, a governance structure that makes sense for decision-making processes. So the next slide is the actual funding announcement. There are 2 announcements. One is for data repositories and one is for knowledge bases. We have just received our first round of applications. I'm glad to have a number of good applications that span the ICs that are supporting this FOA. The review will be in March and funding decisions will go to May Council. And then the next receipt date, I believe, is in the January timeframe. And of course, it continues for the next 3 years. So you have many opportunities to apply for this funding announcement. Next slide. So speaking of cloud computing, many of you realize that we have partnered with AWS and Google in order to provide basically discounted data storage and computational capabilities on those 2 cloud platforms. Stay tuned for potentially other commercial cloud platforms names will be very familiar with to you. In addition to providing you those discounts on data storage and computing capabilities, we also provide training and education for researchers and innovative technologies. We have partnered with AWS to provide really significant enhancement on our researchers' workflows on their machines. So next slide. We'll tell you our accomplishments as of the end of August. We have 17 ICs who participate in STRIDES and 37 institutes like Yale, Columbia, and others. We've trained over 2,400 colleagues from undergraduates to experienced PIs. We have stored 80 petabytes of data in these 2 cloud systems. And because my office works directly on the data storage and data management issues, I can tell you that is incredibly tricky to manage 80 petabytes of data across 2 cloud platforms. This won't be too impressive to our HPC colleagues, but there's been 30 million compute hours on the 2 cloud platforms, and we basically passed on the savings of about $9 million that can be reinvested in other biological research activities. So next slide. So this is one of the things that I've been working on for the past year. It's my opportunity to tell you that we've put 37 petabytes of SRA, sequence read archive, in 2 clouds, and we manage it across 2 clouds. Because it's such a large data set, we've had to partition it between the hot active memory and the cold glacier memory, and that's so that we can save money essentially. And now we have a dynamic management of that data across those across 2 clouds and between hot and cold storage, so that we thaw the data for you when you request it. But if you want to egress those data, that is not paid for by NIH. A grand challenge that we face now is actually searching for data sequences in 37 petabytes of data. It is, as of yet, I think, quite impossible to have a search algorithm on that size of data, but we're working on it. And we certainly are interested in researchers who are also working on search across petabyte scale data sets. So the next slide will tell you, I think this is just a little bit of why we did it. Faster access to large data sets. Go ahead and click through. Sharing of data on a central location. Computing on large scale data and reproducibility. So the next slide. Oh, okay. Data is wonderful, but without the information about the data, the metadata, it has not as much value. One of the things that came out of many of the workshops that actually Jenny ran on how to create repositories that are truly the next generation. One of the things that came out was that researchers need better metadata to enhance data discoverability across repositories. And the best way to do that is to create metadata that truly enhances that data discoverability. And so I like to think of it as metadata is a love letter to our future research selves, and making that love letter, that metadata, as informative as possible for future research use is probably going to go a long ways for our data science capabilities. Next slide. So this has mostly been a discussion about data, but if data is like the oil, then software is like the refinery, and perhaps cloud and HPC is like the pipes. So we have done a lot to enhance software tools for open science in the last year by partnering with all of our institutes and centers. Next slide. We did a supplement program to enhance the software and engineering of valuable data science methodologies, softwares, and tools that would allow researchers to bring new collaborations into their group. Collaborations for software engineering, for example, computational or HPC or cloud researchers into their programs to supplement that work, so they could make those research tools either cloud ready or HPC ready and engage a larger community. We asked folks to work with Strides, but it was not a requirement. So working within our Strides environment was encouraged. At the very bottom of the slide is the notice that if you're interested in such a thing, I encourage you to look at last year's notice. The program was viewed as successful across the institutes and centers, directors, and so I do believe that we will do this program again in FY21. We'll also be hosting a number of PI workshops and events and meetings, virtual of course, so that the funded PIs can work together, lessons learned, and create a community of sustainable software tools. Next slide. Here's just a snapshot of some of the work that we funded in the past year. Fast healthcare interoperable resources to make the clinical data between different types of clinical informatics much more interoperable through the FHIR mapping tool, creating cloud commons, and interestingly, developing new force fields in biomolecular simulations, including and new biophysics methodologies, mostly for blood flow, high performance computing for genomics, and of course, different types of imaging and neuroimaging applications, and applications in AI to image processing. So again, I do encourage you to review the notice from last year to get a sense of what we would be looking for. Next slide. We have a long-standing partnership with the National Science Foundation on Smart and Connected Health to accelerate innovations in computer and information science and to encourage engineering science that supports transformative health and medicine. So this has been a long-standing program. This year, we're enhancing the program in data science and artificial intelligence. Next slide. In the following ways: to enhance information infrastructure and transformative data science, to look at new multimodal sensor systems and hardwares, effective usability and automating health so that we can bring the patient into their healthcare system and make this much more interactive. And finally, medical data interpretation and imaging interpretation. So these are just some of the areas that will be supported in the partnership with NSF. We hope that that partnership will have a funding announcement in the November or December timeline, and we're just working through the process of getting that out the door. So it should just be a little bit longer before we have that opportunity out. It's the same structure, if you're familiar with the program, as in the past, where applications are given to NSF and NSF does the primary review. And then after that, the agencies fund separately applications from PIs, either NSF or NIH. Next slide. And finally, to really enhance data science and create a world together, it's important to bring everybody along. And so creating a brighter future is really bringing our next generation of data scientists together. And we have a number of opportunities that my office supports. The first one is a national NIH Data and Technology Advancement Program. It's sort of like an IPA at NSF, except that it's just slightly different. This year, we will be bringing 8 scholars from academia and from industry to NIH to work on neuroscience research, to work on using artificial intelligence to unravel the Alzheimer's genome, supporting cancer knowledge extraction through the Cancer Research Commons framework, to look at the adoption of machine learning in medical imaging, a program that I think is super exciting to harness data science for innovations in Africa, our H3 Africa program, expanding our theories of brain circuitry, integrating NIH cloud-based platforms for interoperability, and architecting petabyte scale data search. As you can remember from my earlier slide, this is a challenge right now for us with 80 petabytes of data on 2 clouds. Search across those large data sets is pretty difficult, especially when the metadata is incomplete and the data models are not compatible. So this is definitely a challenge. These scholars are coming both from academia and from industry. We will run this program in 2021. We hope to have the announcement out relatively soon for the new programs that scholars can apply to. So all of these programs that you see listed, they were programs that the ICs put forward as grand challenges in their IC. And so we are now soliciting new grand challenges from our institutes and centers. And once we have those, we will announce the program. So if you're interested, or you know of folks who may be interested, this could be a wonderful opportunity to come to NIH for a 1 to 2 year sabbatical to work on something that's truly revolutionary and very challenging in the data and the computing and the informatics world. And the next slide. Okay, this tells you a little bit more about it. If you're a little bit into the weeds, you can come as a Title 42, which is a sort of temporary high-level government position, or you can come as an IPA. Many folks who are in academia do not wish to leave their home institute, so they are coming as IPAs. Okay, so the next slide is we have a partnership with Civic Digital Fellowship Program, the Coding It Forward Fellows. These are undergraduate students from computer science, from information science, from mathematics, statistics. I think we even had somebody who came in from economics last year. They come for a 10-week summer program as interns in the Coding It Forward program. They work in our administrative or funding offices or in the CIT, Center for Information Technology. And they work on really interesting programs such as artificial intelligence for drug repurposing, or developing user interfaces for Strides cloud computing. I had one person who worked on the genomic policies for integrating genomics data with other types of data. What would be the inherent policy of doing that, and what would be the strengths and weaknesses? So they're really interesting summer programs, because we realize that many undergraduates may be deciding to take a gap year for at least the fall, or maybe also the spring term. We've extended this fellowship, and this year we have 24 students working in 14 institutes and centers for a fall fellowship. And I'm super pleased that they're able to come and spend some time with us and work on really interesting and challenging problems. I think that we'll also be having a spring fellowship with our partnership with Civic Digital Fellows. And these are some of the brightest folks that we've had the opportunity to work with. It's really a pleasure. You see some of them pictured here. So the next slide is an opportunity to train the trainers. So data science isn't just for those of us in academia or industry, it's for everybody. So we had a week-long data science bootcamp for STEM teachers. And these teachers came from 25 different states. They were from middle school teachers, high school teachers, and community college, historically Black and historically Hispanic serving institutes, as well as tribal colleges. It was a wonderful opportunity to teach them about some common data science techniques. I think they learned R Shiny, as well as a few other applications. They could connect with other teachers in their field and with data science leaders at NIH and related fields. They learned strategies and success stories around teaching data science to their students. It's a way to create a national network of educators. And they were informed by the NIH programs that they may find useful in their own classrooms. So I'm sure that we will continue our Train the Trainers boot camps. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to reach many different types of people and to really encourage young people to become involved in data science, computational science, and biomedical research. The next slide is technically my last slide, but we can certainly talk about COVID. I think we're making progress in data science through all of the activities that my office supports by working across our 27 institutes and centers. Working together, we've gone far, but we still have a long ways to go, and I hope that you'll help us get to the finish line by contributing and working with us. And with that, I am more than happy to have a discussion or take your questions.
As a reminder, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to raise a question or discuss a point with Susan verbally. If you have any audio issues, you can also drop your questions and comments in the chat box, and Jackie or I will be happy to read for you.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for that presentation. I learned a lot about the data science infrastructure that you're working to put together. I also just don't really know where to start. I see a problem. There's a lot of data out there. There's no specific software for it. There's no repository that exists. And there just seems like there's a lot to even do to get started. And I don't know, maybe an offline discussion would be the way to go, or do you have any general ideas into where I should start looking?
Absolutely. I think that there are some breadcrumbs that you can start looking, but I also hear what you're saying, which is that just general information and guidelines about where to start when you're starting to think about data and data science and repositories. Some good places to start do include our BMIC website. That will give you a list of repositories that are very specific for biomedicine. That may not be exactly what you need. So the other more general places to start looking at where you can find good repositories does include places like the fairsharing.org and DataMed and SciCrunch, which is sponsored by DKNet. So these places will give you, I think, a more broader sense of the types of repositories and scientific areas that are out there. And of course, if you feel that the data that you're generating does not have a community repository, there are some wonderful generalist repositories to explore, such as the Figshare repository, Zenodo, Dryad. That's just a sense of where the repositories are. But what we hope that doesn't happen is that when you have a data to share, that you create a sort of an FTP site on your homepage. I think that would probably not be the right solution for sharing data. That might create a bit of a mess.
No, I certainly like the idea of potentially creating a new repository specifically for this class of data, one that doesn't exist. Initially having it be for, animal models of metabolism, but then ultimately having one for humans and for patients. So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are some human-based repositories that are out there that NIH supports. Some of them are very specific on, for example, cancer, heart, lung, and blood for TopMed. There's also the All of Us, which is a participant level data repository that people deposit their self data in. So there are some opportunities out there for human data as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So maybe from me, Peter Rosa, UCSD, it's more like a comment rather than a question. I think there was a lot of progress made in terms of FAIR with the F and the A, but the real problem is with interoperability and reusability. So there are lots of repositories out there, but in many cases, it's more like a dumping ground of data sets. There are no standards or not enough standards to really be interoperable. And so I was wondering, if that's something the NIH is going to address with future programs.
Absolutely. In fact, right before this meeting, I was involved in a project that we sponsored called Cloud-Based Interoperability Platform Project. And this is absolutely something we're working on. So I can show you, I'll screen share something else that comes partly from some of the work that's informed by their activities. And this is, it really has to do with COVID. I think I have to display differently. So I'll back up one. I'll back up two. We have a number of NIH clinical platforms that house human data that are addressing COVID. So let me tell you about three of them. You probably have just heard me talk about All of Us, participant level data. For COVID, we're increasing the amount of EHR quality data that individuals can contribute to the All of Us program by enrolling new partners through a new way of collecting their basically HMO data. We stood up the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, the N3C through NCATS, as a way to collect EHR derived data as well as lab data and imaging data from our CTSAs, our clinical science and translational programs, as well as our IDEA CTRs. So across our medical communities, the data that's derived in EHR data. This is near to real-term patient participant level data. And we're also standing up a number of trials, our PEDAL and our ORCID trials for hydroxychloroquine and other studies to look at comprehensive data related to COVID-19 on hospitalized patients. This will include gathering not just EHR data, but also imaging data, biospecimens to understand the long-term sequelae of COVID-19. So where are we as of this month? We have approximately 66,000 participants who have completed at least one survey for COVID-19. This will be released in All of Us. I think it's in their controlled access tier. We have right now 16 sites have released data into the N3C from a CTSA, and we are just about ready to release 5 additional sites from the IDEA CTRs. That data is pretty interesting because it represents underserved populations and populations who are at risk, including Native Americans and Alaskan Indians. And our CORAL trial is working on registering their studies in dbGaP, so that data won't be released at this month. So this is the way that we're thinking about it. We have a number of wonderful platforms, the N3C, the All of Us, the Biodata Catalyst, we need to build a fairly robust infrastructure that basically does interoperability across those platforms. I'm going to tell you about 3 elements. How do we connect them together through researcher authentication services? How do we link data across participants in different systems? And I think I don't have the slides for common data elements, but basically there are 2 things that we learned. We need common data elements across all of these systems so that we can speak the same language, and because most of this is electronic healthcare record based, we're mapping, using FHIR, mapping the data to a common data model, which is OMOP. So one of the things that my office funded last year was to create an infrastructure that would allow researchers to basically bypass the fact that every time you wanted to log into a data platform, you had a different authentication and authorization process, which could create quite a bit of work for any researcher. So we just basically, and this is not a heavy lift, technically, it was a bit of a heavy lift sociologically, to create a single sign-on across our cloud-based platforms so that you can sign on once, and through a token, you would be able to be authorized across our systems. And now we're working on basically a visa for data so that your authentication for each of your authorization for each of your data will show up in your passport. We're also looking to link data across our platforms. So for example, participants in any CTSA could be identical. This is an example of somebody named John Smith. He's in a Duke study and also a UNC study in 2 different CTSAs. But we won't know it unless we can actually link those records together. So privacy-preserving record linking is something that we're piloting. It's not new. It's done in Corey. It's done in the VA. It's done in other private industries. We're just taking advantage of this technology, but it will allow us to tell folks if they are the same patient across different sites. And it's done through an honest broker linkage mapping system. It's just basically an encryption hash. Again, nothing novel. It's just an application of existing technologies. Okay, and so that is just some of the work that we're doing to increase interoperability amongst our COVID platforms. I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but it gives you a sense of where we're going.
Thank you.
So I had a quick question on that joint program with NSF that you mentioned. Is that with a specific directorate in NSF, or is that a cross-directorate program?
It is. It's with SIZE. So it's a partnership with SIZE.
Gotcha.
We have a number of partnerships. We have a mathematics program with the Math Directorate for Biological and Mathematics that's just offered through NIGMS, and I believe there's a robotics initiative as well. So yeah.
Thank you.
So I'd be interested in some of the challenges you find with data science, especially now that we're releasing our data management and sharing policy. What are the challenges that you're going to find in creating and sharing and managing your data?
So Susan, okay, I'm not sure whether this is what you're asking, but one of the challenges I sometimes see is I look at data science as kind of like an integrated problem within scientific domains. And when we try to include small components that would address data science problems or data management, into a more domain-oriented proposal, my experience is, at least with other funding agencies, that those proposals don't really do too well, because it typically splits the reviews into two camps: the ones that think that this detracts from the science, and then the ones that think it's interesting, but they want more specific details, which then makes it difficult to kind of strike that balance. Do you have any comments on how, or suggestions how to sort of address that sort of divide in NIH?
This has been a challenge. It has been a challenge in particular for some of our databases and our knowledge bases, who would typically, because they would come in as R01 grants, they would then go to a biomedical study section, and exactly the situation happened which you described, which is either reviewers thought that it was taken away from a different type of objective, or there wasn't enough hypothesis and innovation. And that's not really exactly the role of a data repository or knowledge base. It certainly can be innovative, but not in the ways that sometimes reviewers would think. So that's essentially one of the reasons why we created these FOAs, and they have separate special emphasis study sections. So they will be peer reviewed within with reviewers who are actually the PIs of data repositories or knowledge bases, or who know those well enough that they can evaluate them according to those goals. So I anticipate that this will improve our outcome for data repositories and knowledge bases, and create the ecosystem that we're hoping to get. This is also why we partner with NSF, is because when we want to bring really innovative computer science to our biomedical research portfolio, it's not always the case that those innovative computer science applications are appreciated by our review study section. And it's not always the case that they appreciate that IEEE is the place where computer scientists publish their work, and it's a conference, it's not a journal exactly like biomedical journals are. And so by partnering with NSF, we're able to adopt their study section peer review process, and then bring the PIs to NIH afterwards. And we found that it works fairly well, and that the PIs adapt to becoming R01 investigators during the course of their project. But it's an ongoing issue that I know CSR wrestles with as well, to really get high quality reviews for the applications. And it's tough when you're in a science that transcends biomedical and computer science. It's tough to get the kind of reviews that you really need.
Thank you, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that it's easy to reuse research data now, or is there barriers to reusing data that others have generated, or even finding that data? You have a project and you want to find related data. Is that a hard thing or an easy thing for you?
Speaking for the work we are doing on COVID integration, it's a very major challenge, because we look into various data sources at NCBI, at Ensemble, Uniprot, and there are all kinds of data challenges. They're really not interoperable to some extent, but if you really want to get it, 90% right, then it is a lot of human intervention required. There are all kinds of exceptions, problems, issues, that could be resolved, but there's just no funding for it to really drill down into the details to see how can we make this more interoperable. For example, we are working on the SARS-CoV-2 now, but then we thought, oh, let's go back to the old original SARS and look at the pipeline. So for example, the taxonomy ID for SARS for Uniprot versus NCBI is different. You can't. And you run into all those issues all the time. So I spend 90% of my time trying to make things interoperable. Be better if we could solve that once at the source, rather than having 1,000 researchers doing the same thing over and over again.
I think yep, absolutely. I think you point to something that's COVID has highlighted, but we always knew, which is that interoperability of data Sometimes it does rely on the source or making those ontologies compatible in some way. Yes. That is something that we're finding as well, as we're creating those common data elements across just COVID studies. It's a lot of work, a lot of human work. Well, I see our time is nearly up. It's been a wonderful session. I've had a great time talking. I hope that you'll stay in touch and pass on to me ideas that you may have or challenges. And we can continue this conversation and keep it going. And I wish you a wonderful weekend as well. And thank you, Erin, for pulling this together.